So hello everyone, I'm Natasha, in charge of the communication of the CNA, and thank you to be here for the webinar about how to handle inflation, 3 steps in purchasing. So this webinar is a part of the latest publication of the magazine Excellence Achat, which is available on the CNA members intranet space. During this webinar, if you have any question, feel free to ask on the chat and we will respond to it at the end of this webinar. We will have the intervention of Holger Schiele, Professor of Purchasing at the University of Twente in Netherlands. And he will explain you how to handle with the inflation, developing 3 hypotheses. So Holger, I will let you tell us more in a few moments. And just before Holger speaking, I would like to say thank you to Richard Calvi, Director of IAE Savoie Mont Blanc and co-editor of Excellence Achat, for the organization of this webinar. So Richard, if you want to take over, it's your turn.
Yes, 3 minutes. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Olga, to be here. Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you also, Hugues and Nicola. I don't know if Nicola is here, but my old partner in crime of Excellence Achat. So just a few words. So Excellence Achat, the idea of Excellence Achat is just to confront, I hope to combine the vision of academic and practitioners on some hot topic on purchasing and supply management. So it's really the main topic. So as Natasha say, I invite you to have a look to the last numero of Excellence Achat, which is not on inflation, but it's on relocalisation. And we also decide, I think a few months ago with Hugues, Nicolas and Nathalie to start some add-on on Excellence Achat, which is on the same idea to confront the vision, but mainly to using our international network, which is the XERA network, the community of researcher in purchasing and supply management. So we start this conference with 2 researchers from Twente University, because Twente University, but perhaps Holger can talk a bit more about that, which is, according to me, the greatest laboratory in purchasing and supply management in Europe, even if it's not quite really a town, Twente, but and not in a big town, but it's really a good place to produce knowledge and in purchasing and supply management. So I don't want to talk more about that. And so Holger, I give you the floor now. And thank you. So as I say, you can use the chat to ask a question. We say with Holger that we don't want you stop and respond to the question, but we have a session, perhaps 15-20 minutes at the end to debate on that. Thank you. Holger, you can go.
Great. So the exciting moment, I try to share my screen if it all works. So hopefully you are now seeing the first screen of my presentation. Is this correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and you can also hear me, so that's quite good. Yes, thanks Richard, thanks Natasha for introducing me. I'm very glad to be here and to discuss this interesting topic, inflation, which for many years has obviously not caught our attention too much, but now it does, and we would like to propose a few ideas on how to handle this. Before coming to that, just a few words about me and why I'm also interested in this topic. I'm by my education economist, but now professor of technology management and purchasing, and I'm grown up in Brazil and in Germany. So this Brazil story comes back to the inflation. I will share this in a moment. I've been working for 10 years in industry and as consultant. And then at the University of Hanover, I did my PhD and my habilitation. Yeah, since a couple of years, I'm at the University of Twente. J'ai été aussi professeur invité au IAE à Grenoble quand Richard était là. Mais c'était un grand problème parce qu'on mange très bien dans cette région et chaque fois que je suis retourné de là, j'avais des 2 kilos en plus que ma femme réclamait. Well, anyway, it's not that's the reason why we discontinued this, but anyway, now I'm at the University of Twente, and as Richard also mentioned, we have there our European Laboratory for Innovative Purchasing and Supply, about 30 scholars all around purchasing, and well, I'm one of them, and the professor of industrial technology or industrial purchasing, just as to summarize this. Now, what about the inflation topic? First of all, I have 2 slides with me, which should convince you that yeah, we probably cannot expect this to be stopping so quickly, the inflation issue, right? Which is why it makes sense to discuss this a little bit more in detail. First point here, many people have been arguing that this has something to do with the war in Ukraine. But as you see on this on this slide here, I think relatively clearly, the inflation had already been rising long before. It's not because of the war in Ukraine. It's in fact the largest inflation which we face in Europe since the last decades. So this is the first interesting remark. And there's another reason why we do think that it's likely to continue. It is this one here, the monetary perspective, right? Since the introduction of the euro, we have been actually, or the European Central Bank had been printing money, right? That's what we see here, the difference between the growth of the GDP, which is nice, but not as much as the growth of the money supply. And this typically gives a pressure to for inflation, for the simple reason if we have too much money in turnaround and much more than our goods and services are increasing, these have to become more expensive. And if you look at this number, it would take another 20 years if till the 2 lines are harmonized again. Which is why we do think that it's worth, or it's unfortunately a situation that we might possibly have a longer period of inflation. And that means you are at the right seminar here. That is the message here. Now, what have we brought? 3 hypotheses. First of all, how historically inflation normally had been handled by governments, and typically it ended up in price controls and regulations. So there's some likelihood that we're going to face a similar problem here as well. And then brought some insights on the changing activities of purchases as well. In high inflation environment, purchases turn more into traders, right? They gain a completely new role and become even more important. I mean, if we are in purchasing, we always keep saying how important purchases are. And here there is one more argument why it's getting more important. And finally, also from an operative side, we brought some hypotheses, because in the old days, inflation always meant that you needed more clerical staff, more employees to make price adjustments and so on. But now, thanks to the Industry 4.0 technologies, for example, RPA, we may automatize this. And here we have an example of a little robot, which one of my PhD students, who is hopefully also going to join us here, and then he can even talk a little bit directly about this, because he created this robot which helps a little bit to fight the operative part of inflation, 26,000 handlings or price changes. So I'm just now telling him to come into this meeting. Yes, that's the plan for today. And as Richard already mentioned, just ask or write down your questions in the chat, and we can then bundle them and discuss afterwards. I think it would be nice to have a little discussion then, right? Now, coming back to the history of Brazil. When I was younger and living in Brazil, where I grew up, we had the hyperinflation there. And I recall an episode of my youth when the Brazilian government tried to regulate the price of chicken. Right, so they would set a fixed price for chicken just in an attempt to reduce or to avoid inflation. And what happened? Chicken disappeared from the market, and instead, what we did have, they would only sell chopped chicken, cut into small pieces. That was a reaction of business. So you could not buy an entire chicken anymore in any supermarket, but only small parts of it. And yeah, that is a typical reaction which happened many times throughout history. First of all, the attempt to control prices, and second, that it's failing. Just a small summary. It's a very interesting book here, 40 Centuries of Wage and Price Controls, and the subtitle, How Not to Fight Inflation. One of the eldest documents here, this Code of Hammurabi, some of you know it as a law code, but on the back of it, there's a price list, how much someone can charge for what service. So this was a very 3,000 years ago, they already tried to, or 4,000 years ago almost, they already tried to control prices. Other famous example, Diocletian, the Roman emperor, the only one who voluntarily resigned without being killed. Now this guy also expanded his expenses, a huge army, and so on and so on. The consequence of this was inflation, price increase. He tried to prevent people from increasing prices and killed many of them, right? Conclusion was here, what does it say? Scarcity, more inflation, terrible bloodshed, any relief. This was also the first expressed hyperinflation, which is more than 50% per year. We are still a little bit far away from that, but that's how we are seeing the development. Maybe we have here for the French audience, I looked for two cases from the French environment. Quebec, the colony, has also a history of attempts to price controls, for example, in 1750, when they regulated the price of fishes to avoid inflation. But this only had the consequence that many fishermen had to move away. Or last example of history of failed price controls, but of price controls, French Revolution, right? Several of them, one of the main activities of this revolutionary committee of Robespierre was to control prices. And They had 4 phases in this. Always they tried to take the prices from 1790 and add a certain percentage. But again, no products came to the market. They all disappeared. In the end, people were suffering from hunger, and this only ended with the execution of Robespierre. So the conclusion out of this history is, and there are many, many, many other examples of this, the typical reaction of authorities is once they see inflation, that they try to avoid this by laws, by regulations. And this typically does not work. What happens is that the demand disappears and we enter into shortages. Now, this is obviously something quite interesting or important for us as purchasing scholars. And a small remark, Natasha, I don't know if you can have a look here. Fabio, this PhD of mine, he has registered and got, but he did not get any registration link. Maybe you can send this to him.
Yes,
so that
he just arrived right now.
Okay, so then he can get it. That's great for our later part of the story. So first conclusion, we may want to think about that possibly the same thing could happen here. If inflation continues, at least from a historical background, we have a certain probability the government is likely to try to control activities. And then we will have big problems like that's at that time in Brazil, where some chicken were not available anymore. And I would argue that as part of risk management, we can prepare for this and see what are our critical commodities and which could possibly be subject to such price controls. Are we somehow dependent on commodities? We already see this with energy prices, right? Where the intervention is happening. So this is something we may possibly be prepared for. Now, just as after this little introduction going back 4,000 years, let's come more to the closer time. This purchaser as a trader hypothesis. This is written here in this book, which is maybe the best book written on this topic. It's coming from the 1980s. And so they visited 80 people in Argentina, which again has a hyperinflation, right? And at that time also Bolivia and Brazil, where I was living in the hyperinflation, and they summarized this. Of course, we do not have the hyperinflation now, but the lessons which they took from that time, how purchasing is handling it, we can also use today in a smaller form. And what you see here, of course, they start with the recommendation here, or the comment: purchasing agents should be prepared to deal with price controls. That's what we have seen in the previous slides, right? And then another thing which typically happens in case of inflation is that people go kind of a backshoring, because one consequence of inflation is that the currency exchange rates are getting out of control, right? They are fluctuating much more because the inflation is not evenly in all places, and countries with high inflation obviously have a pressure also on their currency. Hence, the currency devaluates. So a typical consequence in the inflation scenario is that we also enter into currency problems. And in our case, we would argue that this inflation scenario may increase this trend, which we have in any way for backshoring. And there's another interesting thing which they argue here. You have to calculate your internal rate of inflation. What is meant with this? Look at this here. This is the current inflation in the euro area. And on average, it's like 8.5%. Right, but with food we have almost 15% inflation, and with services only 5%. That means not all commodities have the exact same rate of inflation. So if you, in making your calculations, take the average rate, which is published in the newspaper, but the product which you are buying contains, let's say, a lot of, I don't know, nutrition elements, then you are probably wrong in assuming that you're only suffering from 8% inflation. And that is exactly what they recommend here. I find this quite interesting. Every company, for every product, there is an individual inflation rate occurring, meaning that we have to look at this individually. One interesting perspective, also in the negotiation with the supplier, right? Otherwise, supplier asks for something completely absurd, or let's say you are in services and the supplier wants to have 8% price increase. You can tell them, well, generally in service it's only 4%. We may not pay you more. Why? Other insight from this previous experience is that one here. The purchaser becomes a trader, right? What they have been noticing during the time of hyperinflation in Southern America as a lesson, that the CPO should react quickly. A big consequence out of inflation is instability. You have to react quickly. If you follow these processes which we have established in due course during, let's say, a normal time, well, then we are too slow. Now, if we have high inflation and there's suddenly a good opportunity, we have to react more quickly. And the other thing is that sometimes speculation commodities and currencies become better than or more lucrative than the original things which we wanted to buy, right? And this also goes along with inventory policy. In such a situation, it may be much more advisable to have a large inventory to be more flexible to react to price changes, rather than having a just-in-time production, just-in-time purchasing, because then you are completely vulnerable to price changes. So what has happened in these days is that purchasing needed to get much more power of decision, and the process had to be simplified in order to react to short-term consequences. Add to this the shortages which may be caused through price regulation. But last but not least, needless to say that obviously this also is a chance for corruption and a lot of other problems, which is why at that time of the hyperinflation in Southern America, often also the CPO was, if it was a family company, someone from the family, right? Because there's much more chance for abusing this position. Well, so we are moving into slightly a different, much more volatile world, and inflation is, next to many other arguments, increasing this volatility. And the problem out of this is that we have more difficulties in planning, and therefore, on the one hand, we argue that there is much closer need to interact between purchasing and sales department to get the prices right. Sales department needs to know which prices purchasing can realize in order to adjust and increase their prices accordingly, and otherwise they are squeezed out in between, right? Because we have these two types of company. One company is a pass-through company, which simply gives the price increase of their suppliers back to their customers. But there are also, unfortunately, some companies which are more in a sandwich position, which cannot change this so easily. And in particular, in that case, it's important to really have a good calculation. And one little idea here is this one here. To take out the volatility from the from this events from business, which is a logical consequence of inflation, The idea here is of a model also Fabio Fontes developed, who's probably going to speak soon, is to make a deal. If you are in quarter number 2, here in the middle, then you calculate the average price of the first 3 quarters and make a deal which is then valid for the quarter number 3. Or put it like this in some numbers to make it clearer, right? You are here in quarter 2, then you calculate, that's the blue numbers here, the average of the price of the material you want to buy based on the inflation. Calculated this year with a 7.2% inflation, which we have in France in the moment. And then you determine a price. However, this price will be valid for quarter 3. You are here, let's say in quarter 2 in the beginning. You make the deal, make a contract, and give pay this price and make this agreement with a supplier that's going to be paid in quarter 3. And in this way, you can calculate easily because you know what will be the price of the commodity in the next quarter. So you can adjust in advance to this activity. And once you are in this quarter, obviously you take the average of the next one, and so it goes on over time. And this way you take out the volatility and the changes and the difficulties of planning out of the business. Obviously, it's a question of negotiation. The supplier can also calculate this, and he may ask some kind of a surcharge on this, but that's what you may want to agree. Maybe you can even make an index and a formula to adjust automatically. But the main purpose of this idea here, the 3-3-3 model, is to make inflation a little bit more handleable, but by taking it out from this volatility. Now, and as an interim conclusion, right, we have seen that there is some likelihood that inflation will continue, that we may possibly have to take into consideration some limitations or some governmental interventions as a consequence of this, of course, shortages, to which we may want to prepare as part of our risk management system. Then purchasing becomes much more central to the benefit of the company in the higher the inflation is, because if you do not get harmonized the price increase on the supplier side and your sales side, then the company will be squeezed out in a sandwich and make a lot of losses. That's why we argue that to some extent purchaser becomes much more like a trader. Now, the last point of our short introduction here is more an operative perspective. So we have been so far talking about sourcing, about strategic sourcing, but there is also an operative issue linked to the inflation handling. Again, if you look in history, so for example, a very interesting article about the inflation in the 1920s in Germany, and they did a very, very thorough analysis of company documents and numbers of employees and so on. And what they found out there is the supply of this was increasing more employing more clerical staff or transferring existing employees between the departments. So that was typically happening. Look back, if you have increases of prices, you need to adjust permanently the new contracts with your customers, but also with your suppliers, right? Purchasers have to renegotiate permanently. They are in contact every time with the suppliers for discussing about prices. So the traditional way, the traditional thing here is that more inflation, you need more people, or the other way around, the existing people cannot do any strategic sourcing activities anymore, but spend more or less kind of a weekly, monthly, or whatever but much more frequent in the end in unproductive negotiations with suppliers about price increases. And here now is the idea which we had to take out this problem and automatize to some extent this price increases. And here I would now give the words to Fabio Fontes. I had briefly introduced, who writes a PhD with me and is also CPO in Brazil, and has developed a robot which is handling the inflation. I don't know, Fabio, if you can hear us and make yourself heard.
Yeah, sure, Professor. Thanks for the opportunity. Hello, everyone. Yeah, the idea here is to pass a little bit of the concrete experience we are having here at Sanofi. Okay, so I'm a head of procurement of Sanofi here in Brazil. And what we did here is actually we divide everything that we buy, I would say, in 3 groups. One of the group that's the major spend. Then you can have marketing, you have events, you have a lot of service category here, are the ones that actually you don't have the unit price. No, so you buy as a package, you buy as a project. Actually, you do not form the price by unit price. So this is the main group that you have here in terms of spend. And the action here that we are taking is more and more to really automate that, to fix unit price so the user can go directly to the catalog, to the punch outs, and buy it themselves direct to this group 1. Okay, the group 2 is what we have today in catalog. So it's really the C curve. So we have a lot of products that you have the unit price. That's of course once it's a punch out, many of them are punch outs. Actually, the price are updated directly in the e-commerce of the suppliers. So you always have the price updated, already adjusted by the inflation. And what we did with the number 3, the group number 3, was really to this main concentrate on raw materials, packaging, more the direct products that we have all the unit price defined. And what we created here was an RPA where the robots get directed the files from the suppliers and update all the price in our MRP, in our SAP system. Okay, so instead of to have the buyer doing all these inputs in our system, and also for the sales guy also to do this operational work, we created this RPA really to optimize all this process here. Okay, so this is how we divided our portfolio in terms of purchase, and actually focus on the number 3 to be more automatic. So we start that initially getting the list from the supplier. So we do the negotiation, everything starts here in the negotiation. Then we define the new price, and once we have the new price, we get the file from the supplier. The RPA can read any file. Now, this is the benefit of the RPA. No? So it can read any file from any supplier. Once everything is aligned in terms of price, it's go directly to the system. The RPA do itself the work to update the price in the ERP. Okay, so this was the cycle number 1. The cycle number 2, actually, for the ones that Professor was just mentioned, that we have some price formulas in place. Some are related to strong currency in euros or in dollars. We have a lot of things that's imported here in Brazil. Some of them use some formulas as the 333, as Professor Holger was explaining right now. So for this one that actually we use directly the index on the markets, the RPA can go even further and get directly the index based on the formula from the website, from the index, and update direct the system. So there is no need to exchange information in terms of price, validate the tables. Once the formula is agreed, we can directly update both systems, both seller system, we can update directly because it's based on a formula, or our system as a purchaser here. And this is especially important because if you think about the cycle number 3, that is the future. Actually, we do not have so far the cycle number 3, but would be even in the future a kind of autonomous cycle. Now, once, even if the artificial intelligence, imagine, negotiate the price, fix the best formula for both company, have a good deal, then everything in terms of automatic can be done direct to the system of the seller and of the buyer. So this is how we are forecasting and seeing how we can put some technology in our current process to avoid the operational work. So just give another a new way not to show this. So what the RPA does is really he goes to the market, he captures all the index that can be, for example, for paper, we use the FOEX, for plastic, we use the ICIS, CDI, US, for example, and get directly all this information from the website, use the formula to calculate the price, and then goes and updates directly your system. And of course, we have to update also the orders. No, if the order is not still fulfilled, then it's a work of the MRP, the ERP, to update the orders to be delivered by the suppliers. So in terms of KPIs, what we saw is, of course, we have a lot of more reliable inputs in terms of quality. There is no mistakes more, because when you have some mistake between the invoice and our system or order, there is a big problem and even some delay on payment, for example. We reduce people, we did, so of course it's done by the RPA. Now we have only to maintain, even those people that used to work to do this kind of job, now they work a lot more on the RPA solution to update, to improve the solution, etc. Of course, we validate that with the audit and the internal control, so everything is already validated, because once it's done by RPA, it's important that they see what's behind, is in our kitchen doing that. So what I can say here is it's a good experience. We are also want to publish one paper on that to give more detail for the procurement area, so they can really apply that. And it's a process area. It's a process that is present in all the procurement areas, no? So everybody can really apply and see if it fits for their needs. Okay.
Yeah, this is, I think, the interesting point here. Thousands of price changes occurred in the past, and many people had to be working on them, errors, and exactly that is what we have been seeing from the historical records. The more these price increases were happening, the more people you would have to employ. And here we now have the situation based on, as if we're able to put it into a formula, then we are also able to indeed handle this fluctuation without having to employ extra people, and therefore we are much more resistant against inflation.
Yeah, and especially, Professor, what you say regarding the formula, this is really very interesting. You know, that we are facing this situation today in Argentina, that I'm very close also to the people to Argentina, and it's crazy. You know, they keep only negotiate price every day. This is what they do. You see, if you do not come to this solution of formulas that you avoid this kind of conflict and price negotiation every day, you really are not producing any other added value for the company, no? If you only stay on the operational side of the price negotiation. So I really recommend, you guys are facing this, I would say, first time, you know, more strong now, the inflation. If you're able to define some formula based on cost models, based really on the market price, would be great to, it's a good, very good advice to handle inflation and to keep, I would say, the relationship with the supplier from what really matters. That is really to add value.
Yeah, so one idea, and this is kind of our last slide, then we can also open last 20 minutes here or 15 for a discussion if there are some comments, questions, issues, right? Departing from the expectations for a continuation of inflation and the need to adapt to this, including danger of price regulations and the moving more into a trading activity and following prices very closely and adjusting them, and also taking out the volatility out of the system. And finally, a technical solution which might help to prevent entering into this hamster wheel of permanent price renegotiations, which is a consequence of inflation. So in sum, there are some more ideas on how to handle inflation, but we thought that maybe it's interesting to share these insights where we have not been discussing so intensively in the last years, luckily, but which might now be of some use for also here in Europe. So that's our 5 cents on this.
Thank you, Holger and Fabio. Now, so I don't know, Holger, if you have to read the question or if you see.
Yes, I've just asked a long question.
You are still here. Good.
Seeing it and now it seems long. But the point is that maybe we are facing a good occasion to focus a little bit more on value creation than on reducing cost, because cost reduction will be so difficult. The objectives will be so difficult to reach that maybe it could be useful to try to create more value through innovation, for example, with suppliers. And maybe it would be a way to give more to customers, to give them for the value, for the money they pay. So yes, maybe this inflation period could be a good occasion to do something else. And that's it. That's my question. What do you think about this, Holger?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting story is normally with innovations, we are also involving price changes, at least if the product is new. Of course, not if it's a process innovation, which nobody in the end notices outside. But if we are introducing new features and so on, then obviously a situation of inflation where people lose control and overview of prices may give a better possibility to just enter a new product at a higher price, which you wouldn't anyway do, except that now you have more ease of presenting this. So maybe this is an interesting story of looking at this from a positive side.
So we have also another question of Hervé Loiseau. So perhaps it's for both, but perhaps more for Fabio with his experience with Sanofi. I don't know, Fabio, if you can see the question.
Yeah, let me read here.
I mean, we can also talk here. We just said that we simply ask for using the chat if you have some ideas in between which you want to take, right? I mean,
yeah, just to clarify, thank you very much. Danke wel en obrigado to both of you, because I really appreciate your presentation. I do have a question specifically on IT topics, which is maybe a particular topic inside purchasing. But I think as you present it, the inflation could be also an opportunity with the relationship with the supplier, also to try to define this index, or your Eurostat example was pretty interesting. For me in IT, it's a lot of increased pricing where we see a smooth development for services, but energy is a really big opportunity for all the data center and the cloud. The price increase is by default plus 10%, but it's not physically possible to explain. And my question is that do we take the opportunity on the relationship between the supplier and the procurement to create specific index and to create confidence? Because I think it's a question of commercial topic between sales and purchasing to recreate trust for long terms, and how to do it when in IT it's not easy to have a TCO, a clear vision or open book with the key players, I would say. And Fabio, maybe it's too specific, because I think it could be totally different, but could be really interesting, because I see inflation as an opportunity for many salespersons, as you know.
Yeah, and it's true. Huh? The best time to discuss with the supplier about formula maybe is now, because you see when the prices are decreasing, when we are pushing in a tender, you see, it's then probably the supplier is already giving the best price and everything. But right now, you know, they are needing to impact their price, to increase their price because of energy in case of IT, for example. And this is the way you say, okay, we're gonna discuss inflation, but first I need to see your open costs. No, I need to know how much energy is in your costs. If you say to me it's 20%, okay, let's fix some index on the energy, because you know that, and maybe the 333 is very good because you also put some delay on the application. Because of course you're gonna have the increase, but you're gonna have some delay on that for that increase, so you can give this information inside the business. You can say, guys, you know, we're gonna have impacts in 3 months time. Okay, so I'm telling you right now that you have to increase your price for the business, because you're gonna have this impact in 3 months. So this is the right time, the very good time to discuss this kind of index with the supplier, and also saying to them, okay, you're gonna increase now, maybe in 3 months time, we're gonna be based on this 20% for energy, but in 6 months, when like right now, no, the energy price will start to decrease. Okay, we will have this decrease, but also with some lags, with some timing for you. So it's really the right moment to discuss about formulas is now that the inflation is pressure the market a lot. So my recommendation, this is the best time to discuss the kind. And for sure, once you define the formula price, you can of course focus in another thing, you know, because if you only do not have this discussion, you're going to focus a lot on price increasing 1 cent here, 1 cent there, and at the end, you know, if you guarantee that it's going to increase now, but then you're going to have the discount later, it's and you give this visibility for the business, for sure the business you think that very careful to adopt that, no? So this is the good time to do it, no?
Adding to this, that's why we're also so much fan of these indices. When the price goes up, not all suppliers then again lower the price, right? Taking the example of energy in the moment. With the index, we are also participating on the lowering, which in the end is a fairer outcome, but not everybody may want to make profit from this, which again speaks for automation and indices. And of course requires then the closer collaboration, because if you don't have the cost breakdown, then all of this does not work really.
And specifically in IT, it does not exist. They do not want to share transparency.
Yeah, it's a
thanks
good
for
discussion. It's a good discussion,
yeah.
but it's a good time, no? And especially as professor say, you know, if you guarantee in a kind of contract to say, okay, let's sign up a 3 years contract, a 4-year contract, then you give some stability for the relationship and say, guys, we put aside the topic of price, that's very hot topic. Let's concentrate on another thing. The price is defined, you know, for the coming 5 years, we have our formula, we're gonna follow the formula. Of course, we can put some, I don't know, some breaks for each side, you know, to imagine if the wing is start to be very wrong or this kind of thing, you know, but this is a kind of for you to propose something in terms of relationship, in terms of long time contracts, no?
Yeah.
Thank you both. Yes, we have a more technical question about Alexander.
Yes, indeed. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation itself. Yes, I have a more technical question about the RPA and the interface you use. I suppose not an Excel sheet that you're updating, which is uploaded to SAP. Maybe I missed it. Maybe explain in detail what it was. But how did you get the RPA and the data it collected into your SAP system, where you probably have some material numbers and contracts that are updated?
We do it, and this was important. We treat as a user the RPA, you know. So the RPA follows all the steps as a user to update all the price, no? So at least we know exactly that this was updated by the RPA, that there is and this RPA only works with an user, a real user behind. So here he does all the steps that the user would do to update the price, but the RPA do these steps, but it's inside the user, the login, no? So it was important in terms of audit that we got kind of control that the robot, the price that is updating, it's supervised by one user.
Okay, understood.
Maybe it's not so automatic because the guy needs to log in for the robot to work, but at least he's responsible for what the robot is doing. You know? So
okay, so it's not automated.
Isn't it?
Sorry.
Fabio, you said also that you had developed a proprietary software, an own software, which.
Yeah, we did ourselves with the Visual Basic. We capture directly.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very simple one. I would say not so sophisticated, to be honest, but it works. You know, it works. It's done by ourselves here, and you see, it's a very simple one. Of course, if we don't want to expect you to stay updating price very much as well, no, to be honest. But for the ones that we have to update, because you have some complex table, that's the amount you buy, you have one price, how many colors you have on the package, you have another price. So this kind of intelligence is very good now for the robot to get the right price and update the system. But everything is done a little bit in-house, I would say, not very sophisticated.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. So I just indicate that Hugo, which is now running to a classroom, he posts some paper just to read, so you can upload before we cut the connection. I don't see any other question, but I have a small one. Which is more, I'm not so much involved in the technical part, but I understand that it's for sure is changing the relationship with the supplier. So I have just a question if, okay, I understand that this kind of robot is it appreciated by the supplier? Because Fabio, did you have some supplier that decide not to allow you to use the robot? Because I think it's possible for the supplier to say no to that new way to manage the contract with you. So did you have some story, some wrong story about that with some supplier? They say, no, I don't want you use, I don't want you, I don't allow you to use this robot? Or do you really appreciate to use the robot because it's perhaps something which make more clear the relationship in this difficult moment of inflation?
Yeah, for the first cycle, yes, we have some push out because in the beginning we thought, oh, the supplier can send us their file in our format. We thought in the beginning, but then the supplier just gave us a pushback and say, guys, this is the way I give the price list. I cannot change that. You're gonna continue to receive this way. So we had to adapt ourselves, and today the main suppliers, we just put the supplier that we are receiving the file, and the robot recognize the file and do the updates. But it's an internal thing on the cycle number 1. But on cycle number 2, the beauty of the thing is that the supplier can do what we did here in terms of getting the index directly from the market and update our price. The supplier can do the same. The supplier can go there, it's the same index, get on the market and update their sales system. So it's up to them. It's what you say, guys. Once we have the formula, we don't need to exchange more files. No, you go there, you get the index, you put in your sales price, in your sales system, and we will do here the same as procurement. No, and what we realize is really the divergence between the sales price and the buyer price almost got to zero. No, because we have the same rule for both companies to update their price. So this was the experience in the beginning. If you try to make the supplier do your way, this maybe will not work. And depending on the supplier, they're gonna say yes. But big suppliers, they're gonna say, this is the way I work. But the cycle number 2 that you base it on a formula, then it's good for both, because both can automate do the automation of their process. No.
So indeed, the supplier.
Like especially the number 2, yeah.
But finally, it's just a question to save some resources from purchasing side and the seller side.
And especially, and the formula is what we are discussing now. Now, once you have a formula agreed, I believe the relationship improves a lot in terms of you take the price of the conversation. This is, I think, the main
You
benefit.
talk about confident, in fact. It's
Confident. We have a contract, 5 years. We're going to follow this index here. You have trigger for each side just to guarantee that we will not disconnect from the market. But once you do this, you can open up a lot of other conversations outside of the price that's already defined, the formula. So.
Okay. Thank you all. I don't know if there is any question. We have 1 minute perhaps for the last question. So if there's no more question, I just have to thank you the binôme of Holger and Fabio, because it was really interesting to have a bit more the big broader view and apply view of Fabio. So thank you all. I don't know, Natasha, if you have any information to give for another webinar or not.
No, I think it's okay. I just want also to say thank you to everyone to come to this webinar. It was very nice, and that's it.
So the same for me. So was not. It was also good to share in English. I think it's not usual in the webinar of CNR. So I think it's good things too. And okay, so thank you all, and see you on the next Excellence Session webinar. I don't know when. You know that we have the conference in Barcelona at the end of the week. So I will meet Holger. I see Romaric and here, so we can have a look to some new interesting topic and interesting researcher, and perhaps we can come back with some new idea of webinar in few months. Okay. So
yes. Thanks
thank
for
you all. Thank you, Holger. See you in a few days. Bye.
Thank you. Obrigado.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.